Hey guys, welcome to the awakenstate.net. I am Ashley, and today I wanted to talk about something that, let's be real, I do not see a lot of. And that is what happens after spiritual awakening. I don't know about you, but over the years, I've seen so many lists of signs you're awakening, symptoms of awakening, the phases of awakening, how to get awakened, how to induce Kundalini, the 50 signs and sounds and symbols and whatever that you're awakening. But what happens afterwards? Have we ever asked ourselves what happens afterwards? And if you are new to spiritual awakening, I'm sure you're asking that exact question. And I know for a fact, one of the hugest things that was revolutionary for me was, what do I do with it? What do I do after spiritual awakening? This was always my question. I remember right after my daughter was born, this was like the pivotal question that started everything for me, was really asking myself, how do I apply spiritual awakening? Is that even a thing? What does that even mean? And I remember having so many thoughts of, but what do I do with all this information? I know that we're all one. I know that, love is existence. I know all of these beautiful, amazing ego death messages that are coming through me. I understand enlightenment. I understand ego death. I understand all of these things. And there's a part of me that's just like, that's great. But before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So there comes a point of realization. What the heck do you do after spiritual awakening? So that's what we're going to discuss on this week's episode. Tune in. Okay, so we are back. So what do we do after spiritual awakening? This was one of the most hugest questions I remember I had for such a long time. And, it came off of the back end of experiencing ego death. It came off of, how do I apply all of these epiphanies I keep having? And it also came off of, having like a DMT experience and being like, oh, like, what do I do after knowing this? Like, how do I operate? How do I function? Like, enlightenment can do some really weird things to you, such as, you start to question everything. You start to question your existence. You start to question, am I doing what I'm actually meant to be doing with my life? You start to question your sense of purpose. You start to question who you are as a person. You start to question your authenticity. There's so many layers to enlightenment that a lot of people are just like trying to reach nirvana. And I'm just like, okay, but what happens after you reach nirvana? What happens then? Because at the end of the day, what happens after your spiritual awakening is you start to embody awakening. Mic drop. You start to embody spiritual awakening. You start to live spiritual awakening. And I think there's a crucial moment of awareness that what normally happens after spiritual awakening for so many people is they have such an influx of information coming from the higher planes of consciousness that they don't know how to process it. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know what they're supposed to do with it. They don't know how to apply it. And as a result, they're kind of like having their intuition turns on and they're just like, whoa, what should I do? Because this mentality of where everything is starting to be bombarded with so much information, and it's like you're receiving all these downloads, and it's like everything's just coming through you as this channel and you're the vessel. It can be so overwhelming. And like you're emotionally overloaded and taxed on your nervous system because there's so much coming online. And because of that, not only does it feel like you have to learn your gifts, but it also feels like you have to turn on a different operating system on your computer because the previous operating system was like, that was like kindergarten work compared to this. So it's like after spiritual awakening, not only do we have to learn how to understand how we use our intuition properly, but we also have to learn who we are, like our authentic gifts, our intuitive power, how we understand who we are as a person, our authenticity. We have to also understand how we can use this part of ourselves and realize that, we can utilize that supernatural part of ourselves. Like, I remember one thing that really came up a ton for me was, I remember it was like in 2017 or 2014. It might have been 2014. And I remember it was right after I had like a huge, like really weird psychedelic trip. And I remember that like one of the biggest questions for me was, I don't get what's the point of receiving all this information. Like there are things I know about myself in the world that other people don't even understand or can't even dream of, but yet I understand the concept of, everything is a mirror and everything is a reflection. And I couldn't conceptualize, what do I do with that information? Like, so it's like we always see all these signs and symbols and it's like phases of awakening, but it's like no one tells you how to navigate after awakening. And it's like you're free falling. And so I feel like one of the hugest things for me after spiritually awakening, it's like you start to move more into a space of where you're consistently reconnecting to higher self. That was one of the first things. I would say after spiritual awakening, my number one tip is start consistently reconnecting to your higher self. The more you start to understand your higher self, the easier the journey becomes. The second thing I would say is to start to understand your intuition and your intuitive gifts. Start to look at, do you know how to channel? Is channeling your gift? What kind of psychic power is coming through? Some people have more like mediumship. Like, I know that's not one of my specialties. Some people can literally talk to the dead and they talk to people. And there's really cool coaches and even teachers who focus more on communicating to past loved ones. And that's their whole arc. And so it's like, I don't even know. Like, it's so vast. Like, it's so vast to really even just give you examples, because the number one thing you have to realize is you could have clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience, and any of the clairs starting to come online. But if you're spiritually awakening, but you're not fully tapped into that, you might be missing out on like one of your core gifts. And it's funny because I remember before I even knew the words, I knew I was experiencing clairsentience, but I didn't know the terminology for it. And so that's one of the hugest things that I would also investigate is I would look at what kind of gifts am I experiencing? And I'm going to use the word gifts because it's like a supernatural skill. It's like a supernatural, like, I don't even know, trait, I guess we could say. And when you have a spiritual awakening, these things just start to happen. And it's like you have to realize that you need to own that part of you. So that's the other thing that I would say is reconnect to higher self and start to own your intuitive gifts and start to look at what those gifts are and start to look at, am I clairsentience, clairaudience, clairvoyance? Am I more into mediumship? What are the gifts that you have? And if you already do know, I want to hear about it. So please leave a comment and share what is the main gifts that you are owning right now. I want to hear it So definitely leave some comments down below and share with me, what are your gifts? Yeah. And then another thing I would say, after spiritual awakening, a huge piece was learning to apply the messages and the intuitive downloads I was receiving. So I started to learn, and this is like something that came up hugely, is I would get this question so many times that it started to really kind of connect the dots for me, because I started to question it myself, is how do I connect my spiritual life and my physical life together? And I feel very disconnected from my spiritual self and my physical life. And the hugest connection that I've just downloaded and really received with this is you have to be willing to tune into those messages and translate them out back into the physical world. You have to realize that you're like a vessel. So the more that you start to own your gifts, you're starting to take what you're learning from as if the higher planes of consciousness, and you're starting to translate those out into the physical world. And so the messages that you are receiving are being given to you for a reason. And those messages are made for you to ground them out and channel them into your life. So it's like, one thing that I know is very common, it's like we get the download, right? We get that intuitive hit, we get that intuitive nudge of doing something, but then we don't listen to it. We freeze, we don't take the action, we stay in a place of inaction, or we just refuse to listen to it, right? So that's one of the hugest things to work on post-awakening, is how can you take those messages, those intuitive downloads, those signs and symbols that are coming up, and what does it look like for you to start to apply that back to your life? And to feel into, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What would that mean to you to start to do that? Because those three things will drastically help you when it comes to start to looking at, oh, okay, I'm awakened. Now what? Because I think every experience is unique. You know, my experience is going to be different than your experience, you know, and your experience is different than my experience, and so forth, and the next person and the next person and the next person. But there are these core components that are really, really central to understanding spiritual awakening. And one is your higher self. Your higher self, higher planes of consciousness. Understanding higher self leads to spiritual alignment. Knowing without a shadow of a doubt your psychic abilities and your psychic gifts. Call them whatever you need to call them, but know them, because that will help you navigate your aligned self easier. Because when you start to know who you authentically are, in your intuitive self, in your energy levels, how you operate, that helps so much. And third is starting to apply the downloads you receive. If you're spiritually awakening, you're receiving downloads. I hate to break it to you. Maybe right now they feel like synchronicity. Maybe right now it feels like random numerology. Or maybe it just feels like, that keeps coming up. Why? Why does that keep coming up? Why do I keep seeing that over and over again? The more you start to notice that, and then you start to be like, there's something going on there. And then you start to question it, and then you start to realize that it's actually a message because it's showing up on repeat. That's what I'm talking about. Because when you start to be aware of those messages that are coming up right towards you and showing up on repeat to the point where they might be in your face, that's the stuff to pay attention to, because that will help you navigate your spiritual awakening. And then finally, I want to say my bonus tip is, after spiritual awakening, one of the hugest things is to start to really bring attention to why those symptoms are showing up for you, and to look at, where is this coming from? Is this coming from my past? Do I need to work on my third eye? What is happening? Because the more you start to question those symptoms, the easier the journey becomes, because you start to knock them conscious. And when you're conscious of the symptoms, you hold more power over them, and it allows you to see clearly how you can heal them. Okay, so I would love to know, what was your top soul takeaway on this particular topic? How do you feel when it comes to what you should do after spiritual awakening? I would love to know your own thoughts about what you've experienced after spiritual awakening. What was the number one thing that you immediately started to do differently? And don't just tell me meditation. I know you. And I would love to know, most of all, what gifts are you owning? Yeah, that was the other question. Finally, one thing I want to mention, that we do have a spiritual awakening roadmap. It's a 5-day series that you can download, which has action steps and a unique way to understand the spiritual awakening process. If you are confused about spiritual awakening, it sheds a ton of light for you. And most importantly, it has some prompts you can also dig into. I'll leave those links down below for you, and I'll see you guys next time.